Because whoever you're telling yourself that you are is who you will believe that you are. If you're telling yourself that you want to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning when the alarm goes off, but then when 5 o'clock rolls around and you hit that snooze button and then it's, 5:40 before you finally get out of the bed, what you're actually doing there is committing self-perjury, because you want to be this person, but you're not being that person because your internal code dictates that you're someone else. And so ultimately, you are lying to yourself.
Hi, I'm Joe Templin, author of the Amazon Kindle #1 new release, Everyday Excellence in Human Swiss Army Knife. This is the Human Kaizen Podcast, a conversation with interesting individuals that embody excellence that can help you be better. My guest today went from an overweight, self-conscious stutterer to world-renowned strongman, motivator, and author of Superhuman You, and president of Dennis Rogers Old Time Strongman University. I give to you my good friend, Dave Whitley, the Iron Tamer.
Thank you so much.
Hey, buddy. What are you reading or learning now?
Yeah. I can feel the intensity. That's awesome. Thank you for that. Good to be here.
So what are you working on these days, Dave?
I am currently working on a project that is targeted toward fathers, specifically entrepreneurial fathers, that are interested in breaking and replacing generational cycles of like negative thinking, negative behaviors, things that don't serve them anymore, that they inherited primarily from their fathers or their parents, but also from the environment when they were kids. And they see themselves starting to pass these beliefs and values that they don't want to believe in and don't want to value onto their young children. It's project that's very near and dear to my heart. My son is coming up on his 4th birthday. And since right before he was born, I have been in this mode of like, okay, I have cleaned up a lot of my own internal mental stuff and I'm doing well. But what is still present that I absolutely want to end with me and not be passed on to the next generation? So through 4 years of working on that, I have continuously been talking to dads and learning more about what they have in mind. And I thought, I have a purpose here, a mission to help these guys. And so I'm taking all of the stuff that people may or may not already know about how I train the mind and train the body and condensing it into a laser point to help these dads to become the best dads they can be, to be the role model and the father that their kids not only need, but that they deserve.
Okay, so as an entrepreneurial father and the worst father ever, according to my kids, because I've trained them to say that, set the bar low so I can trip over it, as it were. Give me an example of some of this intergenerational trauma that I probably am cursing my children with that I want to be able to break.
Well, if we look at it in terms of different areas within our lives, we can kind of boil everything down into one of 3 different categories. There's our health, which takes into consideration exercise, nutrition, sleep, self-care, rest and recovery, all of the stuff that goes along with our physical health. There is our wealth and finances, which has to do with, our money. If we're business owners or entrepreneurs, everything that is centered around that. If we're not, it has to do, of course, with our personal finances. And that's applicable for both, entrepreneurs and non-entrepreneurs. And then there's relationships, which is just our interactions with other people. And the most important relationship that we have that often gets overlooked is the relationship that we have within ourselves with ourselves. I'm fond of saying that if you knew someone who spoke to you about you the way that you speak to yourself about yourself, would that person be on your side, or would that be someone who is opposed to you, who's your enemy? And very often I find that we have self-talk, inner conversations, what I call mental diets that we feed on, that are thoughts and ideas and concepts that actually weaken us and beat us down. And if we can't be for ourselves, then it's very difficult to have anyone else be for us. And if we can't be for ourselves, it's very difficult for us to show up and be there for our children or for any other relationships that we're in. So those are kind of the three areas. As far as what the generational cycles look like, I just alluded to stuff within relationships. All relationships begin with our relationship with ourselves, with what I call an internal code. And that sort of is an overarching fancy way to talk term for stuff that goes on in our subconscious, how we see ourselves, our self-image, our self-concept. I mean, it's built upon how we interact with ourselves, and then that ripples out our other relationships, our health and fitness. Lots of people that I've talked to grew up in homes where exercise or eating nutritious foods weren't valued, and they want to break those cycles because they see their kids preferring French fries and Hershey bars over strawberries and bananas or whatever, and so they want to establish those habits early on. And of course, the same is true with our finances, right? I mean, I personally, that's a very, very near and dear one to me. I grew up with parents who valued work. They valued hard work. And they also had, so it was like this like strong blue collar work ethic. Like if you want something, you go out and you work and you work and you work until you earn it. But that was coupled with a scarcity, there's not enough to go around sort of mentality around money. And you put those two things together, and you can very easily wind up working all the time and not having anything to show for it. A lot of the entrepreneur guys that I've been talking to and working with have this very strong work ethic, and they're killing it in their business. Most of them are taking care of themselves health-wise. They're killing it in the gym, taking care of stuff. But then when it comes to relationships, especially with their kids, they find themselves not doing as well as they'd like to be doing. And so what I've done is taken the mental training aspects of being able to do things like bend steel bars and drive a nail through a board without a hammer, and all the strongman stuff that you've seen me do when we first met, which if anyone doesn't know, we met when we were both speaking at an event a few years ago, and became friends and have been friends ever since then. I take the mental training aspects of that, which has to do with self-confidence, elimination of fear and doubt, mental rehearsal, visualization, reconstructing the internal code that we have, that we operate by, and directing it into whatever end or whatever goal that we happen to be interested in doing. And I found that the same principles apply all the way across the board, no matter what the end result is. We just have to get our mind operating in a particular way. Wallace Wattles, the author of Think and Grow Rich, Science of Getting Rich, called it thinking in a certain way. It's when we align our thoughts in harmony with universal law and with our goal, then there is a very clear path to success. And if we don't get everything lined up that way, there will always be obstacles at best, and at worst, we will completely get derailed.
So it's like we are out of alignment in terms of our belief system, which if you're out of alignment physically, whether it's your back not being straight, or you're improperly positioned for a lift or a martial arts technique or running or what have you, that's where the damage inevitably comes. And it doesn't allow you to reach that full potential. You don't lift as much of a weight. You don't run as quickly. You don't produce as much business. And you end up interfering with yourself in terms of your success, that self-sabotage that we often hear about.
And not only that, but if we're using your lifting or your exercise example for alignment, not only will you ultimately not be able to do as much as you would have been able, eventually that misalignment is going to manifest itself as an emergency. You can only deadlift a barbell with your back in a twisted up, bent position for so long before that shows up as a physical issue or an injury. The same thing is true of operating systems for our mind, right? If I truly, truly want to earn a lot of money, but in the back of my mind, I believe that there is something wrong inherently, morally, with being wealthy, those two beliefs are in conflict with each other. And even though my desire is to earn a lot of money, if my belief is that earning a lot of money makes someone be a bad person and I don't want to be a bad person, that belief is ultimately going to win out. Because anytime that our will and our belief system are in opposition to each other, the belief system will always win because it's the thermostat, it's the automatic pilot that guides us subconsciously to do the things that we do.
Or as Robert Greene talks about, the belief system and the emotions are really the horse, and our will is only the rider. And so it can influence and direct, but it is completely overpowered by the more primal components.
Sure. And there's not anyone in the world who's ever ridden a horse or been around horses that doesn't know that if that horse suddenly decided that he wanted to do whatever he wanted to do, nothing the rider can do about it. So it's best to work in concert with the horse, in concert with your subconscious, rather than to try to use your will to force it to do something.
Now, Dave, you throughout this were mentioning some of the strongman stuff. And before we really get into that, I want you to take my listeners back to before you were the Iron Tamer, before you had this mental and physical power that you have developed. Give us the snapshot of young Dave.
Young Dave, when he was in 3rd, 4th grade, somewhere around in there, very young, was overweight, very self-conscious because I had this pretty debilitating stutter. I could not speak well, especially in front of a group of people. And when you combine that with a naturally extroverted personality, it sets up a multitude of potential disruptions, misbehaviors, that kind of stuff as a child. Now, I never got in any really serious trouble, but I was quite disruptive in class. And looking back on it now, knowing that in 3rd, 4th grade, something like that, one of the reasons that drove that was that anytime, say it was book report day, and I had to stand up and give my book report, I would start stuttering. I would trip all over my words. And kids, being as cruel as they were, would take every opportunity to let me know about that. Now, I say that as sort of a blanket statement. And I know that all those kids, as I'm looking back on it now, they were just doing what they were doing at the time. And it really wasn't anything personal. So that's been very helpful to me, being able to forgive that and move on from it. But at the time, it was overwhelming. And so I realized that if I could preemptively be disruptive rather than make it be reactive towards some bullying or some other kid making fun of me, that I felt a sense of control that way, right? And so I started doing things like that, kind of based out of anger and frustration, and started going from being bullied to, I wasn't really a bully, but I was also an instigator. That was my way of feeling like I could be in control of stuff. Somewhere along in there, I got really enamored of comic books and science fiction and fantasy and that sort of stuff, and discovered the Hulk. Really identified with the Hulk because he was angry and that was the source of his power, and he was bigger and stronger and more powerful than anyone else, and no one could hurt him. He was invulnerable. He was invincible. And I really wanted that. It wasn't until much, much later that I realized that sort of primal anger response was not something that was going to serve me very well in long-term relationships. But, that's part of just getting older and growing up as well. But during that time was when I saw the original pilot in the original television show of The Incredible Hulk with Lou Ferrigno. And a switch flipped for me when I saw that, because I realized and understood in my little child brain that wasn't a costume. Now, granted, he had on makeup and he had a prosthetic nose and forehead and that really sweet yak hair wig that he used to wear. But his body, his physical presence, that was him. And so in my mind, I had never seen anything like that before. Because, when we were kids, we had 3, 4 TV channels. There wasn't an emphasis on fitness, and no one knew what a bodybuilder was really then, or a power lifter or anything like that outside of people who were engaged in the sport. The general public didn't know much about that. And these ideas of feats of strength and being big and strong like that was fantasy. That was comic book and science fiction stuff. But when I saw him and I realized, okay, that's him. That's how he walks around every day. I immediately decided that was something that I was interested in and latched onto it. And after spending a few Sunday mornings going through the classified section of the paper looking for some way for my little 8 or 9-year-old self to get bombarded with gamma radiation, and let me tell you, that's a hard thing to find when there's no Google. Back then there was just, I couldn't find a radioactive spider.
Yep.
I couldn't find anything like that. So I just sort of resigned myself to, oh, well, I don't know what's going on here. But then I saw Lou Ferrigno again, but this time it was in the movie Pumping Iron. And he was there playing himself. And of course, that movie was centered, for the people who haven't seen it, was centered around the 1975 Mr. Olympia contest, which Arnold Schwarzenegger won. He's in the movie. Lou Ferrigno's in it, and they're sort of the two main characters who are in competition with each other, and a ton of other bodybuilders, the best of the best at the time. And there were all these training sequences of these men in the gym lifting weights, and they would hoist these big heavy weights, and they were huge and they were powerful. And there was something primal about it, and I really connected with that. And I was like, okay, so the way to get big and strong, and the way to lift heavy things is to lift heavy things. And that makes you big and strong. So for Christmas that year, I got my first set of weights, a little, plastic and concrete, 50 kilo set, 110 pound set. And that started me on my journey. And I was on again, off again for many, many years with that. And then fast forward to, I'm in my late 30s. I had been in the fitness business for a while. I was teaching people how to use kettlebells as my primary thing. I ran a kettlebell gym. I met my mentor, Dennis Rogers, who, without question, the most well-known strongman as far as just like being in front of people in all of history, because he was the first strongman to ever capitalize on technology and be on in the 90s and in the early 2000s and stuff. And even in the 80s, he was pretty much any TV show you can name. Oprah, Jimmy Kimmel, Best Damn Short Sports Show, period, all of those shows. And so I managed to connect with him through the connection of a very dear friend of mine, the late, great Bud Jeffries, who passed away earlier this year. He connected me with Dennis, and Bud and Dennis were the two guys who got me started doing feats of strength. Now, the interesting thing, there's a dichotomy there. Bud, at the time that I met him, was 5'10" and between 375 and 400 pounds. Big, powerful man. He went on to cut his body weight down to about 280 or 300 before he passed away. He was this big, powerful guy that I really identified with. He was like a real life Hulk. And then Dennis, 5'8", 165 pounds, very unassuming looking. If you saw him somewhere, you'd be like, oh, there goes somebody's grandpa, right? And both of them were insanely strong. And when at the time I was doing a subscription-based internet thing. This predates podcasts. This is in like 2007, 2008. And I would interview people, much like we're doing right now, and then I would burn and mail out a physical CD to my subscribers. And I did an interview with Bud, and I asked Bud who he thought I should talk to. And he's like, have you talked to Dennis? Not who is Dennis? I don't know who Dennis is. It's like, dude, you got to meet Dennis Rogers. So he put me in contact with Dennis Rogers. Dennis sent me a bunch of DVDs of him both teaching and performing. And one of the first things I saw was Dennis bending a crescent wrench. I think it was probably an 8 or 10 inch crescent wrench. And I just couldn't compute. I mean, like it was like seeing Ferrigno when I was a kid, but with all of the rational capabilities of an adult human who was already strong. I'm like, that just doesn't make any sense. I don't know how it's possible. I must become a student of this. And so that's where we started, was in about 2008 or so, 2007, I became Dennis's student, and he taught me not everything that I know about feats of strength, but he taught me the fundamental principles of how to do feats of strength. And anytime I had a question, if he didn't know the answer specifically himself, he either knew someone who did, or he could point me toward a way of thinking that would get me there. And so I owe almost all of my success as a strongman to what I learned from Dennis.
So he really was your Google.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. He taught me so much about body mechanics and positioning and actual execution of feats. He taught me about being able to carry on a conversation from the stage and deliver a message using the feats to support it. And he encouraged me to develop that skill more. And he also taught me a great deal about how the mind comes into play, not so much in specific techniques or specific methodology for training the mind, but one of the most important things that ever happened was the feat of strength of driving a nail through a board without a hammer was something that I wanted to do, and I had seen Dennis do it, and he explained to me everything that I needed to do. And I had the pad, and I had the board, and I had the nail, and I would attempt it, and I wasn't able to do it. Well, the primary reason I realized, and this went on for weeks or months, the primary reason I realized that I was unable to do this particular feat of strength is that the earliest memory, earliest recent memory that I had where I had seen someone attempt to do that feat was a video that Dennis had sent me. It's not out there in the public anywhere, but it was on a DVD that he sent me where he was doing the same feat, and he had done this feat thousands of times in shows, in training, thousands. But in this particular video, they happened to have the camera running this night. There was the details of it aren't important. There was an equipment malfunction, and he wound up, instead of putting the nail through the board and the frying pan and the license plate that were stacked up, instead of putting the nail through that, the point, he put the head of the nail through his hand, and it was stuck there. And it's wrapped in pad, so part of that pad stuck in his hand too. And to do this feat, you absolutely must generate maximum speed, because speed produces power, and you have to have zero reservations. You cannot hold anything back to be able to do this feat. And so I realized that every time I would go to attempt to do this feat, I kind of had this stutter, hesitation thing. And it was a very similar feeling to the feeling that I had the first time I saw that video where the nail got embedded. So logically, I knew that all safety precautions were in place. Logically, I knew that I was doing everything that I needed to do to successfully complete this feat. Logically, I knew that I was strong enough and fast enough to be able to do it. My technique was on point. I knew all those things, but something in me was putting on the brakes. And finally, the next.
So it was all neocortex, rational thought, but back here where the crocodile lives.
Yep. It was a whole lot of yes up front, and in the back, it was like one big, loud, solid, nope, we're not doing that. So the next time.
So I know you can do that because I've seen you do it. So how did you overcome that mental block?
And I was talking with Dennis about it, and the next time that I had an opportunity to train with him in person, I fly to Texas. And he says, don't worry about it. We'll get it taken care of when you get down here. We're working on various different feats. He says, okay, let's work on the nail drive. Show me what you got. And I go to show him, and I'm talking to him about it. And he says, listen, the problem here is that you're afraid. And I'm like, but I'm not afraid. He's like, you don't think you're afraid, but you are. Something about this is frightening to you. And it's a threat to your survival deeply. And so that is why you're putting on. He says, I can see that you're holding back. I can see that you're not actually putting everything into it, even though rationally and logically you think you can. And then he finishes up with this sentence that like I can still hear him saying it right now. He says, Dave, you absolutely must remove all doubt, all fear, and all limitation from your mind, because your mind is what's controlling your body. And that hit me really hard. And I'm like, okay.
Please repeat that.
You must remove all doubt, all fear, and all limitation from your mind, because your mind controls your body. And that's an incredibly powerful statement. I had some experience with various breathing exercises, meditation, that sort of stuff. And so I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna ponder on this for a little bit. And also on mental rehearsal and visualization. I was starting to research that. And so I went and sat down in the corner for a few minutes and started just breathing deeply and intentionally, bit by bit, relaxing my body, relax my feet, relax my legs, that kind of stuff. Got myself into a very relaxed, very pleasant state of mind. And then I started running a mental movie in my imagination of me from first person point of view, nail in hand, swinging, and not driving through a board, but popping a balloon. There was no board. I was popping a balloon. And I removed every potential obstacle by doing that, because anybody can take the pointy end of a nail and pop a balloon with it, right? And so I got this feeling, this physical sensation. I mean, we're all familiar with the five senses. Lots of people who are physically inclined are familiar with something called proprioception, which is like another physical sense that we have that tells us where our body is in space and time. There's another sensory feature that we have called interoception. And that is the part of us that allows us to detect our own heartbeat even when we can't hear it. It's the part of us that allows us to, understand. There's not a particular physical sensation that goes along with it, but there's more of a feeling. And it's very much like the nostalgic feeling of when you hear that song from 1995 that comes on the radio and you're instantly back with your friends. Or it's very similar to that today feels like Sunday, even though it's Saturday. What does Sunday feel like? And everyone can relate to that, but it's kind of hard to nail down. Interoception is very similar to that. And there is an interoceptive experience that I had with driving this nail in my imagination. After about 10 minutes of doing that, I got up, I went back over to the board. I imagined there was a balloon on the other side of the board and didn't think about the board at all. And I whacked the board with the nail and hit it so hard, the nail went probably 1.5 inches, 2 inches through, and I banged my knuckles on the board. So in the space of 15 minutes, what changed? My strength level didn't go up. My technique didn't improve. My conviction behind it didn't really change. I wanted it just as bad before I was able to do it as I did after I was able to do it. The only thing that changed was my understanding and the communication between that front part of the brain and that reptile part of the brain that said, okay, you're safe. You can do this. So I just suspended the belief in the doubt for a minute. I didn't even cast it aside. I just suspended the belief in it long enough to mentally rehearse popping a balloon with no board and allowed that to carry over into my body. Now, after that, I have not missed that feat since then. And that was in probably 2008. I have literally never missed that feat since then. Every single time I line up with a board and hit it, the nail goes all the way through. I don't have to think about it. It's very much like learning to tie your shoes, right? When you're a little kid, especially if I'm talking to my guys who have those kids that are 3, 4, 5 years old, they're learning how to tie their shoes or put their coat on or whatever. They struggle and they're trying to figure it out. And they go through all these processes of doing it incorrectly. But then it clicks for them and they never do it wrong again. And so we're at this point now where, guys like us that are our age, I could literally blindfold you and hand you a pair of shoes and you could put them on and tie them because you've got enough repetition in now and you wouldn't sweat it. You wouldn't stress over it. You just tie your shoes, right? And so that idea of being able of the mind controlling the body that way, I'm like, well, this makes a lot of sense. How can I expand that? Because my body doesn't end with this meat and bones thing that I walk around in. My body is all of my results. It's my wealth. It's my relationship. It is my physical health, but it's also everything that exists outside of that. So my body in these broad strokes that I'm painting with is everything that exists in my life in a 3D reality kind of world. So if my mind controls that, how does it control it? My mind controls it by programming an internal code into my subconscious, which affects my self-concept, which then directs my behavior almost effortlessly. It becomes habitual, but it doesn't become habitual through repetition only. It becomes habitual because I stop, and I'm just going to pull an issue out of the air and name it and go with it. From that point, I stopped being, man, I'd really love to get up in the morning, but I always hit the snooze button. I stopped being that guy. I wasn't that guy, but you understand what I mean. To talking to myself and saying, I'm the kind of guy who, when the alarm clock goes off, I wake up and I get up. I don't have to hit the snooze button and milk an extra 17 minutes of non-productive half asleepness out, because that's 17 minutes that I've wasted. And not only that, if I tell myself tonight,
but it's an identity change in a lot of ways. So like when you pop the balloon, I bet you to this day, subconsciously, you're still thinking you're popping a balloon, not hitting a ball.
Yeah, that's very definitely wired in there. And you're exactly right. It is an identity change because what I started saying is like with the nail drive feet, I went from being the guy who's like, I don't quite have this. I know that I can do this, but I'm not sure why I'm not able to do it, to I hit this feat every time. I'm the guy who will hit that feat every single time, no matter what.
You nailed it.
Yeah. So the thing about that as an identity shift, when we take it out of a physical performance of something like a feat of strength and we put it into something that's more intangible, like a relationship with your kids or your money or whatever, who are you telling yourself that you are? Because whoever you're telling yourself that you are is who you will believe that you are. So if you're telling yourself that you want to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning when the alarm goes off, but then when 5 o'clock rolls around and you hit that snooze button and then it's 5:40 before you finally get out of the bed, what you're actually doing there is committing self-perjury, because you want to be this person, but you're not being that person because your internal code dictates that you're someone else. And so ultimately you are lying to yourself. And a house divided can't do anything, right? So if we change our internal code, if we deliberately look at our self-concept and say, what do I believe that I just have accepted for however many years and have never questioned whether it's true or right or whether it serves me or whether I want to believe it? What do I have in my own belief system, in my own internal code that is actually causing me a hindrance? And if I can identify that, well, now what I need to do to break it and replace it with something that does serve me. And that is the focus of everything that I'm doing.
You literally hack
the
code,
back to the code
and put in new instructions that the mind and body follow.
Because the mind controls the body.
Dude, that's awesome. Thank you. And for all of my listeners, you can hear what Dave has said here and take and export this concept to your life, whether it's physical health, like you're just starting on your fitness journey or you're getting ready for that marathon, or into your business or your relationship with yourself, your children, your significant other. Money is a relationship too. Take this concept of identifying the operating instructions and then hacking them to create new directions that you want. By the way, everybody, this podcast is brought to you today by Gateway Financial Advisors. I've known the people from Gateway for years and years. Dave knows a bunch of the guys and ladies from Gateway, and they do the right thing and always will. You should reach out to them. So, Dave, my friend, since we have a little bit more time, talk to me more about this. So, let's say that we've got somebody who has a bad physical habit, whether it's smoking, whether they've got an addiction to the phone, maybe it's a physical addiction, or because they're, for whatever reasons. What are some of the little things that you would recommend that they do to start hacking that code and changing the identity?
The first thing that we have to do in any sort of endeavor like that is we have to get an honest assessment of exactly where we are and exactly what's going on, right? We tend to avoid thinking about or talking about our own areas in which we could improve because it's sort of uncomfortable. Now, I say that knowing that there are tons and tons of people who love to just go out and argue in favor of their limitations, right? Well, there's no way I could get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. Yes, there is. You are just choosing to identify with the person who won't. It's not that you can't, it's that you won't. One of the quotes from great old-time strongman named the Mighty Atom. There was the Mighty Atom who had a protege named Slim the Hammer Man. Slim the Hammer Man, his protege was Dennis Rogers, and then there's me, right? So that's who I'm tracing this back to. Yeah, the lineage going back to the Mighty Atom, who died in 1977. The quote from him is that in order to be able to, I'm paraphrasing this, right? That in order to be able to do something, we have to exhibit 100% commitment to it mentally in our mind first before we ever take any action on it. Because without that as the foundation, none of the physical action will carry the same amount of power. Now, I'm aware that there are a lot of people who have success by working from the physical, and then they experience an internal change as a result of that. I know that exists, but that is the hard way to go, and it is a much lower success rate than if you start working from the inside out first. Let's take something just as simple as wherever you are right now, you're sitting there and you decide you want to go into your kitchen and get a drink of water. You have to first imagine that that's what, you have to identify that that's what you want. And you have to realize, okay, I'm in the living room. The kitchen's over there. I have to imagine myself getting up and walking over there, getting out the glass, getting the water, drinking it, and going and sitting back down. And imagining something mundane like that happens instantaneously. But as soon as I say, go get a drink of water, there's a mental movie that plays out in your mind. You know what that looks like for you, wherever you are right now. We have to start with that, and we have to look at ourselves with complete honesty, uncritically, because it's very easy for us to look at aspects of ourselves that we want to change. And if we want to change them, by definition, we do not desire them. It's very easy for us to look at these unwanted aspects of ourselves and then immediately start beating ourselves up about it. I don't know what's wrong with me. I don't know why I can't get up and go to the gym. I don't know why I keep yelling at my kids. I don't know why I blah, blah, blah. Fill it in with whatever bad thing you want. And what's happening there is we're continually reinforcing a thought pattern where I am telling myself that I don't know why I am the way that I don't want to be. And it sets up a loop. And it's very much a self-fulfilling loop. What we first have to do is identify what that thing is and remove any judgment, remove any criticism from it. Uncritically observe myself. When I was in the...
So what you're saying is that this emotional reinforcement then makes it that much stronger because the entire subconscious is coming on in. If you're thirsty, you're not emotional about it. You're like, I'm thirsty. I will solve this problem. I will get a glass of water.
Exactly.
You do it. But I am tired or I'm not achieving X within my business. All of a sudden, emotions creep on in, and that feedback loop is strengthened and created, and it becomes that much more difficult to break because now you've got 100% of the brain working on it instead of 15% maximum of the neocortex.
Right. And so what we do from there is the first thing we have to do, the stepwise process, is there's a thought. The thought by itself doesn't really carry any power. It's potential power, but there's no actual power in just a thought. I can have any thought. I can say that thought out loud. You can receive that thought. You can either reject it or accept it, right? But when I start adding emotion into it, that thought starts to pick up more steam and more power. And the more emotion that gets behind that thought, the more likely it is to be impressed into the subconscious and become part of the internal code that's in our self-concept. So the more emotion, the more vividly we can imagine something, the more introspectively we can experience something. My favorite author of all time is Neville Goddard, and he wrote a book called Feeling is the Secret, where he talks about this kind of stuff, that to think about something is valid, but to really experience it, we have to feel it. And when we feel it first internally, we're bound to experience it externally. And so that's sort of the process by which we do it. And we have to, when we want to change something, we have to approach it from a place of compassion. You cannot hate yourself into improving. You can't. You cannot beat yourself up enough to be better. It just doesn't work that way. But so many of us are wind up being in that state where we bring this guilt and this resentment and direct it towards ourselves with the hope that that's going to, that if I finally just get fed up enough and pissed off enough, then I'll change. It doesn't really work that way. It comes from a place of self-acceptance. And once that switch is flipped, then you start literally internally every moment living like the person you want to become. Then it's just a matter of a lag time, right? Once I've completed the shift internally, once I've completed the shift in both my imagination and in my intellect, my body has to catch up. It absolutely has to catch up. And it becomes a time game at that point. It depends on how far away from where you wanted to be, how long it's going to take you to get there. And so a really good illustration of how time works for you, and time can work for you, or time can work against you, right? We live in the world of 90-day solutions and 8-minute abs and double your income in 30 days and all that kind of stuff. Everybody wants the quick fix. And there's some validity to that, but very often the things that change quickly change back even more quickly. So allowing time to work for you instead of intentionally working against time is a secret of progression that goes back to strongman training. I got a brand new deck of cards to illustrate this, and hopefully you guys can see I'm taking the plastic off. There's no way this is rigged up or altered in any way. Brand new deck, taking them out. Full deck, and you can listen. You can hear and see. There's no cuts. There's no anything going on with it. So all that to say, this is not a magic trick. This is a feat of strength. This is the closest thing to a magic trick that I got, though. And if you watch really closely, I got a nice light on it too. Watch really closely right here. What happens? I'm going to take this grip. Well, actually, let me explain a little bit about what's going on here. Ripping a deck of cards is hard. Ripping a single card is easy. My son's 4 and he can do that, right?
Yep.
Anyone, just about it, can rip a single deck. This is a full deck plus jokers plus instruction cards, 56 cards, right? When I was first learning to do this feat, I was not strong enough to do it. Because 56 cards is a lot, right? Even a full deck of 52 was just more than I could do. But I found out that my starting point was, I'm splitting suits right here. My starting point was, where's my king? I'm trying to do this backwards. Was a half a deck. I could do a half a deck, right? And so Dennis told me, cool, you can do a half a deck of cards. Go rip 4 or 5 half decks. Do that 3 or 4 days a week. And then next week, add a single card. And so the next week I added a single card, and the next week I added a single card. Now, if you're good at math, you realize you start with 52 cards and you can do a half a deck. That's 26 cards. If I can add 1 card per week in 6 months, I've gone from half a deck.
That's 26 weeks, half a
in
year.
6 months, which is a relatively short period of time. I've gone from half a deck to a full deck, and a full deck is a relatively respectable feat of strength for most people. So I'm going to demonstrate what it looks like right here.
And that's the reason for the nonlinear growth curve on the front of Everyday Excellence, because it's the little things compounded over time that make the difference.
So if you watch right here next to that finger, I'm going to grip it, and you see that I start to make sort of an S shape with the deck. And as it starts to go, you see a little line start to appear right there. And then we just keep going with it. And once it gets started, it's much easier to finish it, right? So we gain that momentum, right? And then after you've done it for a while, you can even take the half deck and quarter it. And, this is something that I have done tens of thousands of times. I shudder to think how many decks of cards have met their end at my hands, fresh out of the box. Never even got a chance to be played. But through practice and over time, you can develop just about any quality that you want to develop. You just have to understand fundamentally what it is that I can do right now. Where do I want to be? And what are the next logical, incremental, add 1 single card to the deck sort of steps that I can take to that? And in doing that, we can rewrite our internal code for sure. Now, the interesting thing for me is with the graph that you showed a moment ago, if we followed the formula that I described and I could go with 26 cards and add 1 card a week, I should be able within 6 months with roughly the same amount of effort, be able to rip a full deck of cards and get there without really noticing, right? I had a coach, Marty Gallagher, who called it creeping incrementalism. So I would very, very, very gently. And there's a story in the Mighty Atom book where when he was a young teenager training with his mentor, he was do specific exercises with buckets. And every few days, his mentor would grab a handful of sand and throw it into the bucket, making it imperceptibly more difficult. So this whole notion of I have to break out of my comfort zone, okay, that's one aspect. But what if my limitation exists outside of my comfort zone? And what if I just simply do the work that it takes to make that comfort zone expand? Because when I first started ripping decks of cards, a full deck of cards was way outside my comfort zone. There was no way I could do that. And I very gently, over a short period of time, expanded that comfort zone. And I found out through that training that it actually happened exponentially. I started adding one card. And after a few weeks of that, I started adding 2 or 3 cards a week and actually got to being able to rip a full deck of cards within about 3 months rather than 6. So as you develop confidence, as you develop skill, and those skills are, myelinated into your nervous system, that breeds more confidence. That confidence gives you the willingness to practice and make it an enjoyable practice that doesn't happen under like huge amounts of pressure. Are you going to learn?
So you get better
Exactly.
at getting
Get better at getting better for sure. And if we take it out of the feats of strength world and put it into another example, if you don't know how to swim, are you going to learn how to swim better if you go take swimming lessons in a safe environment with a coach that you trust and develop that skill, or if I just throw you off the boat and then you have to swim back to the edge of the boat? Now, you will be able to swim in an emergency, but you will not be a good swimmer, right? You'll do just enough to survive.
Nor will you enjoy it.
And so the question is, do you want to exist in a world where you're doing just enough to survive and everything's kind of okay? Or do you want to thrive and become, as you say, excellent at something? And all of that is driven by how we view ourselves in relation to whatever the goal is.
Dave, this has been incredible. I know that you've got a fast coming hard stop to go get the boy. Any call to action that you have, offers for my listeners that you want them to check on out?
Sure. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to do that. I am working on a coaching program, like I said at the beginning of the call, for entrepreneurial fathers. It's moving into beta right now, so I don't really have anything ready to announce to your people yet. That'll come in a couple of 3 weeks. But in the meantime, you can go to superhumanyobook.com. And I'm actually out of copies right now. I've got them back ordered. I would show one. But the book that I wrote, Superhuman You, that you got it. Yeah. I will send that book out to you.
I was looking at my copy last night.
I will send that book out to you for free. All I ask is that you pay for shipping and handling. So it's like $10. That covers my printing costs, envelopes, postage, all of that kind of stuff. So I break even on it. I'll send that out to you. If you go to superhumanyobook.com, you can get that for free. That will put you on my mailing list, and then you can reply and respond. And I generally reply to every email that comes back in because I care about the people who have decided they want to invest some time and energy into hearing what I have to say. I want to honor that. There will be a lot more information about the upcoming Project for Fathers in upcoming emails that I've already started sending out. So there's a lot of information about that. If you're not a dad, or if your kids are grown or whatever, that's fine too. I talk about a lot of other stuff in my emails. It all has to do with learning how to use your mind to control not only your physical body, but also your entire human experience in 3D.
Awesome, my friend. Awesome. So before we go, any last words of guidance or insight for our listeners?
Imagine better than the best you know.
Awesome. This has been my good friend, the Iron Tamer, Dave Whitley. I'm Joe Templin, the author of Everyday Excellence. Be excellent and grow today. This has been the Human Kaizen podcast, brought to you by Gateway Financial Advisors. Gateway, helping you get what you need. I'm Joe Templin. Be excellent and grow today.